America. Do not let the pinstripes fool you. I am not John Tobacco. I'm Frank Morano. Welcome to Liquid Lunch. It is a Taco Tuesday, a terrific Tuesday, and a two for Tuesday edition of Liquid Lunch. We have an action-packed show for you today. Coming up in just a little while, returning to cable news, at least during the week, at least for a day or two, is the one and only Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly, who dominated the cable news landscape in prime time for 16 straight years, sat down with John Tobacco and me, and he'll chat with us about Iran, about the upcoming presidential debates, and about a wide variety of other situations, including the current state of cable news. You're not going to want to miss that. But this show is called Liquid Lunch, and I'll never forget where I was the first time that I heard the term liquid lunch. And I was describing a lunch that I had just had with New York Post columnist Steve Dunleavy. And this was probably 20 years ago. And someone said to me the next day, "Oh, was it a liquid lunch?" And I learned then what the term meant. Of course, it's a lunch that largely consists of no food but alcohol. And we learned last night that legendary New York Post columnist, legendary crime reporter, former New York Post editor, former anchor with A Current Affair, Steve Dunleavy passed away. Let me tell you something. There will never be another journalist like Steve Dunleavy. Everything that you see tabloids do today in both the United Kingdom and in the United States, and probably in Australia, they owe, at least in some part, to Steve Dunleavy. I think it was Rupert Murdoch who Steve Dunleavy, his fellow Australian, would refer to only as the boss. Rupert Murdoch referred to Steve Dunleavy as the greatest journalist who ever lived, something like that. And if you ever experienced Steve Dunleavy, you can understand why. Let me give you one quick Steve Dunleavy story before we get to the day's top headlines. Steve Dunleavy started out as a copy boy in his father's newspaper in Australia. His father was a photographer for a local newspaper in Australia, and Steve Dunleavy started as a copy boy for that same paper. Ultimately, Dunleavy goes to a rival newspaper. So he and his father are working for rival publications while they're still living in the same house in Australia. They both wanted to get the scoop on a story one day. So what did Steve Dunleavy do? He slashed his own father's tires so that his father couldn't get the story. That is the kind of reporter Steve Dunleavy was. And as anybody that has met Steve throughout his 81 years can tell you, Steve is one of the great drinkers of all time. Steve Dunleavy, there's not a person alive that has seen Steve Dunleavy sober. And Steve Dunleavy drunk was a better writer than anyone writing for New York tabloids today at their soberest. So Steve Dunleavy was a friend of mine. I'm going to miss him, and the show is called Liquid Lunch, so we'd be remiss if we didn't at least pay some tribute to the man that invented the term liquid lunch. Now, a lot of you wondering, where is John A. Tobacco Jr.? Is he at the golf course? Is he cruising around on a yacht somewhere? No. Believe it or not, John is actually in Florida right now with the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence. Now, I'm not making that up. That is absolutely the God's honest truth. He is at a Hispanics for Trump rally, and we're hoping to connect with John via Skype momentarily or throughout the show at some point. But as any of us that work with John Tobacco know, with John, you just really never know. In just a minute, we're going to talk to Jen Kerns, a longtime Republican strategist who's actually been a writer for presidential debates, to find out what we can expect in the Democratic debates this Wednesday and Thursday. Now, if you haven't been following this, the way this is going to work is there are 25, yes, count them, 25 candidates for president for the Democratic nomination. And the latest, by the way, is Joe Sestak. Joe Sestak is running for president. Did you miss that campaign announcement? I'm sure that's going to just upend the whole race. Everyone was just pining and waiting for Joe Sestak. So they're only allowing 20 candidates in the debates. So rather than have all 20 of them on the stage, they're going to do something similar to what the Republicans did back in 2016. They're going to have 10 the first night through random selection, not based on poll numbers, and 10 the second night. So we're going to break that down with Jen Kerns in just a moment. But I do want to mention it is National Leon Day. So if your name is Leon, this is your day. Congratulations to you. We all remember some of the best-known Leons that we've been familiar familiar with, Leon Trotsky, who unfortunately was assassinated by Joseph Stalin, and Leon Spinks, who beat Muhammad Ali in what was at the time a very, very big upset. But forget about Leon's. Helping us break down this week's debate is Jen Kerns, longtime Republican strategist, somebody that's been a writer for these debates. Jen, how are you?
I'm fine. It looks like you have the gavel and the Trump pen.
That's right. We're not messing around. Especially
John
on
who?
Exactly. Especially in a day where we're expecting, or a week we're expecting a lot of Supreme Court decisions to be announced. Jen, you were a writer for the debates on the Republican side back in 2016?
Yes, when we had 17 candidates, which seemed like a lot at that time, but now the Democrats have far surpassed that with a lot more lesser in name and resume.
This time around?
Yes, this time around.
So just tell us logistically, obviously when you're writing for a network like Fox and they're producing a Republican debate, it's a little bit different than NBC preparing for a Democratic debate. How do you begin to manage a debate stage with 10 candidates on it?
Well, it shouldn't be different because if you remember, Fox was doing the first debate for Republicans, NBC's doing the first debate for Democrats. But look at the difference here. Look at how tough Fox News was on the Republican candidates in that debate, especially President Trump.
Well, so that's what I was going to say. I don't remember them being that tough on the Republican candidates. I remember them being tough on Donald Trump. I remember every question from Megyn Kelly, Chris Wallace, Brett Baer is, oh, aren't you anti-woman? How can you be serious? Are you going to pledge to not run as a third-party candidate? And then the question from Mike Huckabee is, what's your favorite color? So, but who do you expect them to train their eyes on, train their scopes on this time around on the Democratic side?
Well, I think the first night, Elizabeth Warren will come out the winner because she's sort of in that undercard debate. She's kind of the mommy sitting at the kids' table of the lesser-known candidates. Who they should train their sights on, look, in order for NBC to maintain any sense of credibility going into this debate, they've got to ask some key questions. They've got to ask Joe Biden why there's been no endorsement from his president, Barack Obama. This is a guy, they weren't just casual friends. This is like a George H.W. Bush and Reagan situation where he served for the guy as his vice president for 8 years. There should be an endorsement by now. If there's not, it's one of two reasons, Frank. One is that Barack Obama doesn't have confidence in Joe Biden to do the job, and that's bad for Joe Biden. Or the endorsement of Barack Obama would be so toxic to Biden in the general election that Biden maybe has asked Obama not to endorse him. Either one of those are bad for both the Democratic Party and Joe Biden.
Don't you think Biden has prepared for that question 6 ways from Sunday? I mean, it's such an obvious question that I would think if you're either a moderator or one of the other candidates, if you're looking to trip up Joe Biden, you got to think that maybe you're better off throwing him a curveball, something he's not expecting.
Yeah, it could be. Look, the other thing NBC needs to ask about is the price tag of all of these socialist proposals. That's a question that needs to go not only to Biden. He's trying to sort of distance himself from the socialist wing of the party. But they need to ask that question of Bernie Sanders. They need to ask that question of Elizabeth Warren. How much are your proposals actually going to cost? I don't think NBC will do that. And with a partner like Univision, this is going to be a 2-night slugfest, slander fest over Donald Trump's border crisis.
Well, the interesting thing back in 2016 is that unlike 2012, unlike 2008, Donald Trump really made an issue of illegal immigration, a political issue, and forced all the debates that he was involved in, and even the kiddie table debates that he wasn't involved in, to be about illegal immigration. I had thought that because of Bernie Sanders and his push for Medicare for all and so many candidates adopting that position, that these debates would largely be focused on things like that, Medicare for all. But it appears that the dominant issue this time around isn't an issue at all. It's Joe Biden's comments about race and segregationists. What does it say about the nature of the Democratic Party that the issue that they seem to be fighting the most about isn't even really a political issue?
Right. And look, the race issue has been going on for many decades. If you look at even the Democratic Party record on race, it's been pretty dismal. Democrats were the ones that voted against freeing the slaves. You go back 100 years, basically every proposal that would have benefited African Americans, the Democrats voted against for 100 years.
I think that's unfair to hold today's Democrats accountable for what Democrats in 1866 were doing, don't you? I mean, it's like holding me accountable for what Christopher Columbus did.
No, I don't, especially in light of their proposals to, take down the Statue statues of Robert E. Lee and all these others. You know, the Democrats have to own their history, just like Republicans have to own their history.
But so
I think
you're a Republican. You're
game.
not responsible for everything every Republican has done that's come before you, right? I mean, you shouldn't have to answer for something dumb that Rutherford B. Hayes did, should you?
Well, no, but I do. I get asked about it all the time, and that means that it's fair game in this political culture, and it's fair game if you're running for president, if you're one of the 20-plus candidates.
That strikes me as just a talking point that Republicans bring up to try and drive a wedge between the Democrats and the African-American community, and so far it's been an unsuccessful strategy. But tell me, from a moderator's perspective, how do you keep order where you have 10 candidates on the stage at the same time, all wanting to get a one-liner in that's going to be repeated on the news cycle for 24 hours? How do you, whether you're Chuck Todd or Rachel Maddow or any of these moderators, how do you keep the conversation going so that each candidate gets to say more than one comment each?
Boy, that's a tough one, and that really comes down to how strong are your moderators. I think it's helpful that you have Chuck Todd there, who has hosted Meet the Press. He's also the political director at NBC. He knows these guys frontward and backwards, perhaps not the undercard candidates as well. But he's really going to have to be the timekeeper here and ensure that people don't get to, you know, speak over one another, because that's never a good thing for the audience.
Two final questions. If you're going to pick one of the undercard candidates, one of the people that are sub 9%, let's say, that has a moment in one of these debates that breaks out, the way Ron Paul did back in 2008, the way Herman Cain did back in 2012. Who's your candidate that's going to break out this time around?
Boy, I think it's going to be actually Andrew Yang. I think he's got a platform that's pretty appealing, and it's going to be pretty appealing to a swing voter. He talks normally. He talks at the street level. I think he's got a shot to sort of come up through the middle here. And
final question in the last 30 seconds that we have. As a Trump supporter, who's the Democrat you most want to face? Who's the Democrat you least want to face?
Boy, in that, I would say Joe Biden and Joe Biden.
Fair enough. Jen Kerns, we bring on those that know where the rubber meets the road for a reason. All right. Well, coming up next, John Tobacco is going to be awfully sore at me because coming up on our Two for Tuesday panel, we booked two folks that he has been wanting to be in between for a long, long time. Brand expert and QVC guest host Aaron Sykes and Turning Point USA spokesman Aaron Elmore. Now, they're both right of center, but I'm going to see if I can find an issue or two where we can maybe drive a wedge in between them. You're watching Liquid Lunch. I'm Frank Morano, sitting in for John Tobacco. Still to come, Bill O'Reilly. No flipping.
Stay tuned for more Liquid Lunch Live. We'll be right back.